Well, hello. So as Jessica mentioned, my name is Sheila Eccles. I work for Defense Finance and Accounting Service, and I've been there for about 22 years. I started when I was an infant, of course, because I'm not old enough to have been there 22 years. But actually, I started as a college student, and I just worked part-time as a co-op, and then after graduation, some really great opportunities were offered to me, and then every time I thought, okay, this is it, I'm going to try something new, another great opportunity fell into my lap. So 22 years later, here I am. A lot of the information that I'm going to share with you today, I know just from personal experience, having been there for so long and gone through the application process. I'm out of breath. Sorry. But then a lot of what I'm going to share with you, I also know from a professional perspective, because one of the things that I do is offer direct support to DFAS employees that are interested in looking for jobs. So I help them to develop their federal resumes. We also go out to USA Jobs. We do job searches. We do lots of things to support the employee. And those are the things that I'm going to talk to you about today. So you get bonus, you get the inside information before you're actually inside. Okay? And as Jessica mentioned, as we go along, if you have questions, please just feel free to interrupt me. This is going to be an informal session. It's sort of a small group of us, so I think we can handle questions as we go. And we'll just take it from there. All right. So, you've probably never seen a federal resume. I guarantee it's nothing like anything that you would expect. You've probably seen the typical private industry resume that starts with in a bulleted format, usually no more than 2 pages long, and it usually has your education up top and your experience that follows. Well, the federal resume is completely different than that. What you see here is a sample entry from the typical federal resume. It's overwhelming. You'll notice that within there, this is a narrative format. You might even see some errors in there. It might sound colloquial, like we're having a conversation as opposed to a formal document. So this is what I typically see. This is a really bad example of an entry from a federal resume, but it's common. And I wanted to share it with you so that you avoid some of the common mistakes as you prepare to apply for federal jobs. At the end of this presentation, we'll see the cleaned up version of this, what it should look like, and how it should read, okay? Normally, when I'm reviewing resumes at work, there are 2 documents that I typically use. One of them is a resume review checklist, and it includes all of the really important points that you should consider when you're developing your federal resume. A lot of it is common sense, like proofreading, but a lot of it you wouldn't know unless somebody told you. I shared a copy of the checklist with Jessica, and so is this in their package? So you have a copy of it. So as you develop your resume and then go to review your resume, you have a guide to help you to know what to look for. The other document that I use is called the Poison Words document, and I've taken this information directly from, let me get my notes. I've taken it directly from a book called Resumes for Dummies. This poison word list tells you all the words that you should avoid using in your resume. Words like fired. For obvious reasons, you probably wouldn't want to say you got fired. There are some nicer ways to put that, like maybe you were downsized, or we could talk about the euphemisms that you could use, but there are words you don't want to use in your resume. Some of them are not so obvious, and so I see lots of mistakes. Like, we'll see where people will say things like, responsibilities include, and then they'll go on to list the responsibilities that or the functions that they perform in their jobs. But that sounds a lot like a position description and not a resume, so we recommend avoiding that kind of language. Bottom line is, these are words that you ought to avoid when you're developing your federal resume, and we can talk about that in much more detail later if you'd like to. So a few things that you should know about your federal resume. Because it's typically written in a narrative format, people get carried away. They often include way too much information. They equate their federal resume to a roadmap of their life. So they include things like where they went to high school, which is usually not necessary when you are applying for a federal position, especially if you've had a few jobs already. They'll include things like their hobbies or personal interests, things that just don't belong. Your federal resume is not a roadmap of your life. You will find if you start including too much information in your federal resume, it's going to be way too long. And when I speak of length, that's another interesting topic. In the private industry, the typical resume is 1 to 2 pages. In the federal government, the typical resume is 3 to 6 pages. That's very long. But if you're not careful, you can actually exceed that 6-page limit and get yourself into lots of trouble. I already alluded to the fact that your federal resume is not the same as your private industry resume. There's some really important distinctions that you should note. One of the primary differences that we already talked about is length. Federal resume is 3 to 6 pages. Private industry resume is 1 to 2 pages. The purpose of a federal resume is different than the purpose of a private industry resume. In private industry, a resume is usually intended to get you a job interview. But in the federal market, the resume is used to get you the job. That's different. In the federal resume, the hiring manager has the authority to interview some, all, or none of the candidates. So it's very important that you include as much information as you can in your federal resume, just in case the hiring manager isn't interviewing. You want to give them enough information that they can assess your qualifications. Another important distinction, the preferred format for a private industry resume is bulleted, whereas again, we talked about the preferred format for the federal resume is a narrative, paragraphs. And then there's one thing that private industry resumes and federal resumes have in common, and that is the need or the importance of including accomplishments. So one of the things that I find when I'm looking at resumes, and this is across the board, whether it be a private industry resume or a federal resume, one of the things that I find is that most job seekers tend to omit accomplishments. And we're good at describing activity, what we do, where we've been, who we've worked for, but we don't talk about the results of our work. So one of the things that I'm asking you to focus on when you develop your federal resume especially is to focus on results. So you were the accountant and you processed 10 trial balances a month, but what were the results? What were the benefits of you being there? What distinguishes you from everybody else who's processed 10 trial balances a month? So it's just important to identify your specific accomplishments. So we talked about that. Other things to keep in mind. The format. One of the biggest problems that I see with federal resumes is that they're usually messy. They're overwhelming to read because, again, they're in a narrative format or lots of paragraphs, lots of words, and they're sort of disorganized. So you want to make sure that you keep the format neat and clean. Depending on how you decide to build your resume will determine how effective you are at keeping your format clean. If you decide to use a resume builder, for example, like USAJOBS, you have less control over the format. But if you build your resume in, say, Microsoft Word, you can control a lot. You want to make sure that you keep the resume clean and easy to read. One of the other things that I see, so we're always looking for ways to distinguish ourselves. How do I make my resume stand out from everybody else's? One of the things that I see is that sometimes people try to do artsy things like include graphics on their resume or special colored paper or just like things that sound ridiculous as we talk about it, but people do it. Just don't. Just don't. Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to mention that I had been working with a recruiter through the National Park System, and she specifically said that she goes through hundreds of resumes, and you really want to come up with some ways to stand out. I asked for suggestions, and she said, use your imagination. Whatever it is about you that will make you stand out. Well, I ended up just doing a border. Just a professional-looking border. But she was really talking about ways to bring her attention to my resume.
Okay, well, so you bring up an interesting point that I haven't made yet, and that is there's no such thing as a perfect resume, right? For every person that you talk to, you'll get a different opinion about what a resume ought to look like. So at the end of the day, you have to make a judgment call about what you believe belongs in your resume. I can't speak for other federal agencies, but from a DFAS perspective, it's best to keep it clean. There are things that you can do to make your resume stand out. You can do things with the font. I wouldn't recommend using things like italics, just because italics become difficult to read, especially if the resume gets duplicated multiple times. But you can play with the font. You can do some simple borders, but I don't recommend like adding your picture to the resume. I don't recommend doing funny colors, just because it makes your resume stand out in a bad way. It sort of looks unprofessional, actually. So it's a judgment call, but my recommendation is that you not. Just keep it clean. Unless you're applying for a position in a creative field, if you're going to be an interior designer or you're an artist or something, then it makes sense to deviate from that standard clean business resume. But if you're applying for a business type position, keep it business, keep it professional. One of the things that's important for your federal resume is that you include what I call headlines. When you have a narrative format, and now would be a great time to actually look at that handout that I just gave you. It's a sample of a federal resume. When you are writing in a narrative format and you're including paragraphs in your resume, it's easy for the reader to become overwhelmed. You know, when I see a resume without any sort of organization, I always ask the job seeker, so what parts should I pay attention to? Because I'm probably not going to read all 6 pages, every word on all 6 pages of your resume. I'm just not. And I am, I'm pretty easy. I'll probably take more time on a resume than the typical person would. So if I'm not going to read it, I guarantee other people probably won't either. So you have to find a way to organize your resume in a way that is easy for a hiring manager to scan to see what's most important about what you have and what you can do without wading through lots of heavy detail. So one of the things that I recommend for a federal resume is that you develop what I call headlines. So here's my sample headline. Woman delivers baby in laundromat. Without having any of the details for that story, you can probably tell me what happened. Probably the baby came early, because no woman in her right mind purposely delivers in the laundromat. So something went wrong, but I suspect mom and baby are fine, because if they weren't, the headline would say, woman dies during childbirth, or woman delivers stillborn baby. So this headline tells us that everybody's okay. You can probably surmise that the woman was not alone at the laundromat, that there were others that were there that maybe helped or called for help. Because most women would be too modest to call the newspaper and say, guess what just happened to me? We just wouldn't. It's a really private kind of thing that we wouldn't tell that story on our own. So you can guess that somebody else was probably at that laundromat too and reported the story to the news media. So this is an effective headline because it tells you so much in just one line. For your resume, for your federal resume, you need headlines like this that tell what you have and what you can do without the details. Now, you will want to fill in with details to support those headlines, but as a hiring manager, I want to be able to scan your resume and see lots of headlines that tell me the main things about you. And then if there are things that catch my eye, then I can go back and I can read the detail, but I don't want to have to read every word on the page. So that sample resume that I gave you, you'll notice that there are headlines. Those headlines are written in all capital letters because it makes them stand out. And they say things like, independently analyze source documents and process transactions. But then I go on to provide some detail about it, 99.9% accuracy. So enough to quantify, enough to demonstrate accomplishments so that the hiring manager understands what I do and then has a little bit of support to justify those headlines. Others. Manage documentation, and then you go on and provide the details. The main thing is that this resume is organized around headlines so that the reader isn't overwhelmed with lots of heavy narrative. So that's the story. We don't need to read the story. I made up the story, but that will be the details that already summarize what we surmised. So here's another sample headline. Woman goes into labor 3 weeks early. That's a bad headline. The reason why it's bad is that is not a story. This happens all the time. It's not significant. So the point is that it's possible to develop headlines for your resume that are bad, that are ineffective. So as you're developing your headlines, you want to make sure that you're using enough of the right words. And when I say enough of the right words, you might ask, well then, what are the right words? Where would I get them from? Well, there are lots of places to get the right words for your headlines. There's so many, let me try to pull one down. Actually, let me see if I have any examples with me. Oh, here's one. Responsible for providing customer service. That's a bad headline. One, because it contains some poison words. That whole responsible for, responsibilities include, functions include, that's job description language. And job description language describes what ought to be, not what actually is. Your resume is intended to show accomplishment, not what the world should be. Also, when you say responsible for customer service, it doesn't tell the reader enough about what you actually have done. Let me think of another example. Oh, here's one. Copy reports. That's the headline. Copy reports. So this particular employee is a DFAS employee whose primary responsibility includes making copies of reports and other documentation. But that talks about what she does, but doesn't provide enough of the rationale behind why she does it. So right now there's a big push within DFAS and the federal government to become audit ready. That means that you gave me that look like, what is that? It's more government speak. Audit ready, that means that we are able to produce financial statements that are accurate and reliable, that can be audited, where you can tie back the details on the financial statement back to individual transactions. And there are lots of things that we have to do in order to demonstrate that we're audit ready. Part of that includes documenting processes, maybe copying some reports, making sure that we have the documentation on file. So she said in her resume, copy reports, but that's just this much of what she's really doing. So she really minimized the significance of the work that she does. Had she said something like, develop documentation and develop and record documentation to support audit readiness. That would be a much more effective headline because it ties to some agency initiatives that are significant, and it helps the reader to understand how she supports the agency initiative and how she might be able to help support similar functions if we were to hire her for another job. So if I'm applying for an accounting job, the vacancy announcement might say something like, must be able to reconcile 10 lines of accounting or 10 appropriations each month, okay? So when I develop my headline for my resume, one of my headlines ought to say something about being able to develop, to reconcile appropriations. So you want to look at the actual vacancy announcement to see what the requirements of the position are, and then pick up language from that vacancy announcement and use it in your headline so there's a clear connection between what the hiring manager is looking for and what you are able to offer. So you just want to be specific. Other places that you can look for the right language for your headline, and we'll talk about this a whole lot more in just a minute. When you apply for a federal position, one of the things that you have to do is complete an assessment questionnaire, and it's part of the application process through USAJOBS. Well, that assessment questionnaire asks you lots of things about your experience and the specific things that you've done that would qualify you for that particular position. Well, they use lots of language in that assessment questionnaire that you can use for your resume. You want to pick up some of that language and repeat it back in your resume. Again, drawing a clear connection between the job you're seeking and the experience that you already have. Okay? So some tips for your federal resume. You will not have as much trouble as current federal employees have with this one. Write tightly. One of the things that we do in the government that I don't understand it, I can't really explain it, but we have our own language, right? And we always use too many words to say really simple things, right? So I always remind the DFAS employees to write tightly. And what that means is that you use as few words as possible to accurately describe your experience or accomplishments. If you can say it in 8 words, say it in 8. Don't use 30. One of the things that I like to quote is a study that I had once read that talked about the ability of adults to comprehend written word, right? And what they said is that it was a relatively small study, but I think accurate and effective. They had taken a group of people and they'd asked them to read several pieces of written material with the sentences being varying lengths within the paragraph. And what they found was that about 100% of the readers understood a sentence that was 8 words or less. And then as we started adding words to the sentences, comprehension really plummeted. So that by the time you got to a sentence that was more than 30 words, and that sounds outrageous that a sentence could have more than 30 words, but I promise you, every day, I see resumes with sentences of 40, 50, 60 words long. That is crazy, but it happens. But in this study, what they found is that comprehension plummets to almost 0 when you have a sentence that's longer than 30 words. So you want to keep your sentences tight. Be clear and succinct. Say it tightly, use as few words as possible to accurately describe. You won't have that problem because most of you probably haven't been in the government and you haven't been indoctrinated into government speak. But it's something that federal employees have to be very careful with. Next thing, you want to be sure to use an active voice. So in the federal government, we also have a problem with this too. So we like to describe things sort of passively. Things have occurred as opposed to an actor performed something. So we might say something like, reports are delivered on the third work day of the month. Well, that's kind of passive. An active way to say that is deliver reports on the third work day of the month. So if you lead your phrases with a verb, you're going to be active almost every time. You want to phrase things actively because it's powerful. Passive language is weak, and you don't want that for your resume. Next thing. This is something that federal employees have a problem with. I'm not sure so much private industry, but you want to make sure that you omit personal pronouns. I, me, my, our. When you're writing in a bulleted format for a private industry resume, you don't have so much trouble with that. But when you start trying to describe what you do in paragraphs, in narrative, sometimes it's challenging not to say I or we or our. You never should. The assumption is that everything in your resume is about you. So you never have to say I or me or my. It's just understood. So that also leads to the next thought, and that is that in your federal resume, it's not expected that you provide full sentences. So it's appropriate to start a phrase with deliver reports on the third workday of the month. Notice I left out I or my or me. You don't need complete sentences. The phrases just have to make sense. That's all. Use proper tense. When you're describing the work that you do today, verbs are in present tense. You read, write, develop, reconcile, research. That's happening today because that's the job that you have now. But when you're describing the work that you've performed in the past, in previous jobs, the verb should be written in past tense. And that applies across the board no matter where you're applying for the job. That's something that we sometimes see that people have trouble with. Omit poison words, and we've talked about some of those poison words. One of the poison words that I see a lot, that I love to talk about just because I see it so much, is assist. That seems like such an innocuous word. What's wrong with saying assist? And I see it a lot, especially in federal resumes, because we use a lot of narrative. And we're modest. We don't want to take full credit for the things that we do. So we say, we assist with doing such and such. The problem with using assist is that it can be interpreted in a couple different ways. Assist can mean, I got my name on the project, I'm on the team, but I'm not really carrying my weight, so I sit in the corner and I watch you work, but I get credit for it too. That can be assist. Or assist could mean, I did the whole doggone thing. I came up with the idea, I developed the project plan, I developed the tools, I provided the training, I did everything. The thing is, the people that do everything usually say it. They usually say, I did everything, which means if you're using assist, you were one of those jokers that watched in the corner. Even if you really weren't, that's the message that you're sending. So there are some poison words that are really, really wicked that you want to avoid. So you want to check out that list that is included in your folder, because some of the words you probably accidentally use don't realize that they're wicked, but you want to get them out of your resume. This one you will not have a problem with, but it's huge for federal employees. It is huge. Spell out all acronyms the first time used. So, I talked about how we have our own language in the government, and we do. It includes lots and lots of acronyms, and sometimes we use the acronyms so frequently that we forget what it stands for. I mean, we know what it means. We know it represents a system or a process, but if you asked what each one of those letters represents, sometimes we can't even tell you because we're so familiar with the acronym that we rarely spell it out. If you happen to be describing something that you've done, even outside of the federal government, and you're tempted to use some sort of acronym or some sort of shorthand version, don't do it. Because the average reader is not going to know what you're talking about. Spell out everything the first time. And even if you're applying for a job in a really technical industry where they're using technical terms, you'll want to make sure that you use some of those terms because that sort of says you're in and you know what you're doing. But you don't want to overwhelm the reader with technical terms because in all likelihood, they're not going to know exactly what you're talking about. And then the last thing, proofread, and then proofread again. Spelling errors in your resume are deal breakers because what they really tell the reader is that you can't be trusted with simple things. Can't even run spell check right. So why would I want to give you a job that requires you to be responsible for really big and important things? After you've reviewed your resume a half dozen times, check the spelling, look for grammatical errors, pass it on to somebody else. Because sometimes, too, we read what we intend to say, not what we actually said. So it's good to have somebody else take another look at your resume. And then every time you get ready to apply for a job, review your resume again. Check for the errors. And that actually brings up another point. So in the federal government, sometimes the temptation is to take one resume and use it to apply for every job that you find. Well, that's a problem because remember we talked about those headlines and tying those headlines to the language in the vacancy announcement and the job questionnaire. So as you go along, you're actually tailoring your resume for a specific job. Well, if you use the same generic resume for every job, you haven't tailored, and chances are you're going to be missing the mark on most of the jobs that you're trying to get. So you want to actually take the time each time you apply for a federal position and revise the language, especially those headlines. Proofread, proofread, proofread. So this is the sample paragraph that we started with in the beginning. It says some really wacky things. I was the special assistant and principal advisor to the director and deputy director of DO, whatever DO is. I really liked this job a lot. Periodically, I got to speak for the director on selected matters at the executive level and or take action consistent with the director's management objectives and program goals during the director's and or deputy director's absence. Doesn't that sound insane? What a mouthful, but this is real. This is not a made-up entry. It's real. I assist the director and deputy director in managing, planning, implementing, monitoring, and evaluating the finance accounting services. In this capacity, I provide guidance recommendations on management on the management of directorate financial, manpower, and physical resources, administrative policies, practices, and procedures. My duties also include planning, directing, coordinating, and evaluating administrative services for the directorate. I manage staffing and employee programs. People always want me on their projects because I am a fast learner and I get things done. 15 years ago, I was also a public speaker and did some team trainer. Those experiences helped me prepare for this job. Outrageous. There were so many problems, and if we had the checklist in hand, we could actually tick off the many things that are wrong. So because I knew it would probably be too intense for this session, I marked everything that's wrong. I circled it and highlighted it in red, and you'll see poison words there. You'll see some personal pronouns that were used, just some plain out errors. Bad. Well, here's the revised version. Notice, each paragraph begins with a headline. The headlines are supported by details. Those details are written at the 5,000-foot level. So this is sort of ties back to that concept that we talked about, writing tightly. If you aren't careful and you don't write tightly enough, you'll find yourself describing your work as if it were a desktop procedure. Log on to XYZ system, press enter. At XYZ screen, type such and such, press enter. So that's ground level. I'm telling you specifically the details of the job that I do. And believe it or not, I see that in resumes sometimes, where people are just going into so much detail that it's not even useful to a hiring manager. Then the 30,000-foot level is, I work, like no details. Really high-level generic statements that no hiring manager can use to assess the job seeker's qualifications. The 5,000-foot level is about where you want to be, and it sounds like this. Leader, special assistant, and principal advisor to the director and deputy director, dispersing operations. On behalf of the director, developed and executed complex cross-functional directorate-level plans and programs. Provided direction to a staff of 130 employees, including 4 GS-13 and 2 GS-12 supervisors, numerous accountants, analysts, technicians, and intern associates. So it's enough information that the reader understands what the job seeker did, but without going into all the detail, how many personnel actions were processed, or just the detail that a hiring manager wouldn't need, but enough that they can assess the qualifications of the job seeker. So that's the cleaned up version. And then you'll notice at the end, there's a section called accomplishments. I recommend that every resume include a section called accomplishments where you state them outright, because sometimes what I see, if accomplishments are included at all, and a lot of times they are not included in the resume, but if they are included, they're blended in with all the other narrative. And like I said, the typical hiring manager is not going to read every word on every page. So if you speckle your accomplishments within all that narrative, they'll probably miss it. You want your accomplishments to stand out, so I recommend that you create a section called accomplishments and then specifically identify what those accomplishments are. Notice that in this sample resume, the only place where you see bullets are in the accomplishment section. No bullets anywhere else. We don't use those very often in federal resumes. Just for the accomplishments, bullets say, look at me, I'm important, I follow me. So you want to limit the use of bullets to the things that are the most important that you want the hiring manager to pay attention to. So here are the accomplishments. In collaboration with peers, implemented process improvements to increase efficiency and accuracy of vault operations. Projected annual savings of $50,000. Earned Green Belt certification. And we could go on, but that's generally what it ought to look like. So the first time you develop a federal resume, you're probably going to feel a little bit challenged, maybe even a little bit confused, even with all the information that we've provided. But one of the things that I can offer for you is an opportunity to review your federal resume after you've written it up. After you've given it your best effort and you think it's ready to go, if you send it to Jessica or me, or Jessica can get it to me, I have a team of people that review resumes all the time. And they are absolutely expert at reviewing federal resumes and identifying what's working and what is not. After you develop yours and you think it's ready for prime time, send it on. We'll mark it up. We'll explain what's working and what's not working. We can have a conversation about it over the phone, and then you'll be ready to go. This is the first step to getting a job in the federal market. And if you can't clear this hurdle, you're going to be stuck. So we'll go on next and we'll look at USA Jobs, but I want you to know that the most important thing that you got to know today is that you've got to master that federal resume. Because even if you're able to upload a resume onto USA Jobs and apply for it, you're not going to get referred if you aren't saying enough of the right things in your resume. It's critical. So take me up on the offer. I'm here. Okay? So next we're going to talk about USA Jobs. For most federal agencies, this will be the primary place where you'll go to find out about vacancies or vacant positions, and this will be the place where you'll go and actually begin the application process. I say most federal agencies because a lot of agencies, or some agencies, still have their own processes that operate outside of USA Jobs. The gentleman in the back mentioned that he could go to USAJOBS.gov and also apply. And that's true for some other federal agencies too. But the bulk of the federal positions that you would be looking for are available through USA Jobs. So we're going to talk about USA Jobs, and then we're going to talk about the sister system that sort of operates in the background that stores some of your information, and it's called the Application Manager. And this will only matter, this Application Manager will only matter when you first establish your USA Jobs account. And from there, it'll become mostly transparent to you, but it's an important step in preparing to apply for a federal position. Okay. So, does anyone, who among us has any experience using USA Jobs? Fantastic. This is great. Okay. All right. So then a lot of this is going to look familiar to you. So that you already know that within USA Jobs, you can create an account. You can store up to 5 resumes out on USA Jobs. You can use it to look for vacancy announcements. You can save searches. So I think of myself, for example. Not that I'm looking for a job. I keep using myself as an example as if I'm trying to escape, but I'm not. I have a really great job. But I save searches. I look for all federal jobs at the GS 13 or higher level in the Cleveland area. And I get a listing once a week, sometimes twice a week, depending on how many searches I have saved. And they send me jobs that meet my criteria. So you can save searches that way, help you to search for jobs. And you can also access lots of other information. There are tutorials and just other information about how to use USA Jobs and get the most from it out on that website. So the sister system, the Application Manager, is where you would go and actually view the assessment questionnaire that I talked about, and you'll want to view it before you apply for the job because you'll want to use it to tailor your resume. So you want to know what it says. And if there are other things you need to do to prepare before you take that assessment questionnaire, you want to know in advance. You'll use the Application Manager to check the status of any vacancies that you've applied for. And also you can store documents out on the Application Manager that you can reuse over and over again. So they work together. What you'll mostly see is the USA Jobs side of it, but that Application Manager is running in the background once you establish your account. So when you get to USA Jobs, which is at www.usajobs.gov, one of the first things that you'll need to do, if you haven't done so already, is to establish an account. Now, you don't need an account to search for jobs. You can just log onto the site and run a search. But if you're interested in applying for a job, you're going to need an account. If you want to save multiple versions of your resume, you're going to need an account. I say just do it. Get it done one time, and then you're all set for all the jobs that you'll be wanting to apply for in the future. So you get to establish an account. And in order to establish an account, you're going to be asked for some personal information. So sometimes people get sensitive about this, especially, in this age with identity theft and just the risk to your information. Sometimes people get nervous about setting up online accounts, but it's really essential. It's all secured. It's on a secure website. I have an account. I actually at one point had multiple accounts. I recommend it, and I tell you, there's really not a whole lot to be afraid of. But if you want to maximize your federal job search, you're going to need an accountant. So you're going to have to provide some information, including your name, address, phone number, email. You're also, when you set up your account, you're going to be asked some questions about your citizenship, your status. Are you a federal employee already? Are you a veteran? You're going to be asked whether or not you're willing to travel, and if so, how much travel, 1 to 5% of the time, 50% of the time. And these questions are going to matter in the future when you go to apply for other jobs and when you set up your searches, because you're not going to get information that doesn't marry up with what you've set up in your profile. If you say you're not interested in traveling, you're not going to get jobs that pop up saying that 95% travel required. So how you set up your profile matters. And you can change your profile, so it's not written in stone, but just know that this information playing in the background will affect your searches, or the results of your searches. You're also going to be asked some optional information like demographic information, gender, race. You don't have to provide that at all, but it's out there, and they'll ask you for it, but you can bypass it. Once you set up your account, then the world of USA Jobs opens up to you. You're able to do lots of things within your account. You can upload a resume or build a resume within USA Jobs Resume Builder. You might ask, does it matter? And the answer is yes, it does. I try to have both versions. I looked at my account today. I see that one of my versions is not there. I might have accidentally deleted it. But the benefit in building your own resume outside of the resume builder is that there is no character limitation, that you can say as much as you want, though remember, you want to stay underneath 6 pages, but you can say as much as you want. You can format the resume the way you want it to look, and you just upload it into USA Jobs. The downside to that is that some agencies will not accept an uploaded document, but they'll tell you that up front. So I just recommend that you have an uploaded version, but then also a version that you use that you build in the resume builder. My primary concern with using the resume builder is that there are limits on the number of characters that you can use. So as you describe your work experience for one job, for example, the limit might be 5,000 characters. That sounds like a lot, but it's really not that much. It's not that much at all. So you'd be challenged to say enough about yourself to qualify for the jobs that you're looking for. I recommend that if you only have time for one version of the resume, do the one in Microsoft Word and upload it. From there, you can tighten it up and tailor it down so that you can fit it into the resume builder. But you'll probably want to have both versions. If you have to choose one, though, upload, just because it's easiest, especially for people that are new to USA Jobs. It's just easier to manage. And we talked about that from the account, you're able to upload and save documents and check your application status and search for jobs. But this is where it happens, based on what you put into your account. From USA Jobs, you're also able to search for vacancies that meet your criteria. You specify what they are, and I'll show you how to do that in just a minute. But then you'll get access to the vacancy announcements, and from USA Jobs in the vacancy announcement, you can actually apply right there. You can actually save searches, save vacancy announcements, and come back later. So everything gets contained within USA Jobs. It just makes life a little bit easier, makes the application process simpler. Also within USA Jobs, you can select and attach resumes. And within USA Jobs, you can have up to five 5 versions of your resume. You think that's a lot, but it's not, because remember we talked about customizing your resume or tailoring it for every job that you want to apply for. So you'll want multiple versions available to you. So after you establish your account for the first time in USA Jobs, you are going to be directed to the application manager. And this is where some more documentation gets stored and other information about you gets stored. And like I said, it'll mostly run in the background after you establish the account the initial time. You're going to be asked for some more information like your social security number. You know, we're trying to move away from social security numbers in the federal government, but we're not there yet. It's the unique identifier that distinguishes you from everybody else on the planet. So you're going to be asked for that information, and it's secure there, but just know that you won't be able to establish your account there if you aren't willing to share your social security number. You're also going to be asked for some other information about yourself, your address. It's sort of a repeat of what you've already input into USA Jobs, but these two systems are operating independently until you establish both accounts, and then they link. And then you don't really see this again, except for when you go out to look for the status of an application or a specific communication from an agency where you've applied. So this is really just a one-time thing that you have to bother with. So, within the applications manager, we talked about the assessment questionnaire. This is where things get exciting, right? This is where you get the opportunity to initially demonstrate that you are eligible and qualified for the job, and you're going to be asked a series of sort of generic questions. For example, in this one it says here, please respond yes or no to the following questions. Failure to respond to these questions may result in an ineligible rating. Note, you must submit the required documentation to verify your eligibility as indicated below. This is very important because when you apply for a private industry job, if you realize you answered a question incorrectly, or you made a mistake, or you forgot to attach something, most of the time you can call somebody and say, can I resubmit, or I goofed. That doesn't happen in the federal government. Everything that you submit must be there. If it's not there when the vacancy announcement closes, you're automatically deemed ineligible. There's nobody you can call, or even if you did call someone, no one would be able to help you, because there are all sorts of rules that we follow that come from OPM, and we cannot deviate the rule for one individual. So it's important to get all this right up front before the vacancy announcement closes, because if you don't, you basically lost that opportunity. Yes, sir.
Did you have the chance to change your answers?
Yes, you do. You can actually answer questions and then save them and then come back and take another look at them or change them. You can actually make changes to your questionnaire and your resume until the vacancy announcement closes. And each vacancy announcement will have a date on it telling you when it closes. After that, it's a done deal. And if you goofed, it's over for that particular vacancy announcement. So the previous slide, these questions were asking you about your eligibility. For example, the question is, current DFAS employee, I am a permanent career or career conditional employee of the Defense Finance and Accounting Service, yes or no? And if this job was only open to DFAS employees, if you answered no to this, this will be a question that screens you out. You will be ineligible for the job. Yes. That's an important question, because the questionnaire changes depending on the vacancy announcement. There are some eligibility questions that will be asked for every vacancy announcement, but there are then some job-specific questions that get asked that change from vacancy announcement to vacancy announcement. When you apply for the job and you go through the process of going through USA.jobs and clicking all the right buttons, and then there'll be a button that says apply here, you click that button and it's going to take you to the assessment questionnaire. You don't have to look for it. There's not a special website that you go to get it. It's attached to that vacancy announcement and it's just part of the process. But you'll have trouble getting to it if you haven't established your application manager account, yes. Exactly. It's usually yes or no, you have it or you don't. And in some cases, in most cases, it's not even yes or no. For eligibility, it's yes or no. Either you have it or you don't. For the other questions, it's to what degree or what level of experience do you have it? A, B, C, D, or E. But there aren't any of those psychological or behavioral type questions on these assessments. You know, if you were a tree, what kind of tree would you be? There are none of those. None of those. They're all related specifically to the job that you're applying for. Okay. So then you answer the eligibility questions, then you go on to answer some job-specific questions. Here's an example. Identify out-of-balance conditions and or inconsistencies to reconcile accounts or other financial records. Option A, I have not had education, training, or experience in performing this task, but I am willing to learn. Option B, I have had education or training in performing the task, but have not yet performed it on the job. Option C, I have performed this task on the job. My work on this task was monitored closely by a supervisor or senior employee to ensure compliance with proper procedures. Option D, I have performed this task as a regular part of a job. I have performed it independently and normally without review by a supervisor or senior employee. And then option E, I am considered an expert in performing this task. I have supervised performance of this task, or I am normally the person who is consulted by other workers to assist them in doing this task because of my expertise. That's typically how it's worded. They'll state a function or a responsibility, then they'll ask you, where do you fall in? Based on these choices, which one are you? Now this gets tricky, because you do not want to inflate your experience. You don't want to lie, because there are actual consequences for doing that. If you are not already a federal employee, you absolutely can close the door on any opportunity to become one. But if you're a federal employee and you inflate your experience, you call yourself an expert when really you're like a B, I have had education and training, but I haven't done it yet, and you call yourself an expert, if you're found out, and there's a good chance that you could be found out, there are disciplinary actions that can and may be taken against you. Usually it starts with like a letter of counseling or warning, but you could actually be fired from your job for lying. So you want to be careful about how you describe your level of experience. And I don't want to scare you. I don't want you to minimize your experience either. If you are toggling between a D and an E, I don't know. I think I am an expert. I mean, but I could be a D. If you think you're a D or an E, call it an E. Give yourself credit. But if you know for certain you're a B, don't call yourself an E, because it'll shut the door for you and possibly rob you of any future opportunities. But it matters how you answer these, because remember, everybody doesn't get referred. The best qualified get referred. And if there's a pool of 100 people that have applied for the job, they're probably going to be, and the job is listed at 1 grade interval, so it's a GS9 job, probably 15 people plus any tie scores would get referred. So you don't want to minimize your qualifications, because even if you're kind of qualified, if the people that you're competing with are very qualified, you don't get referred. But you don't want to overinflate. It's a tightrope. It's a tightrope to walk, but you need to really consider these questions as you answer them. Excellent point. So when you answer these questions, you click E, I'm an expert, the next thing you'll be asked is, where can I find this in your resume? And you actually have to tell them where in your resume demonstrates that you are an expert. So you have to be able to prove it. So it's important to make sure that your resume correlates with these questions. Again, that's why we got to pull that assessment questionnaire as you're developing or revising your resume, so that you make sure you're saying enough of the right stuff. If you're calling yourself an expert, it ought to be clear where in your resume you have that expertise. So those are job-specific questions. You want to be careful how you answer them. You want to make sure that you can justify your responses with the details that are contained within your resume. There's got to be a correlation there. Also, in the application manager, you are able to upload documents and reuse those documents. So when you apply for a job, there's some specific things that you'll be asked for. If you're already a federal employee, for example, you'll be asked for your SF-50. And what it shows is your highest pay grade, the number of years of service you have. It's going to show some information about you. You could be those documents could include a DD-214 if you were a former military member. It definitely would include your resume, possibly a cover letter, but you'll be given a list of options of the types of documents that you can upload. It's your responsibility to upload the right documents too. If you miss it, they'll tell you on the vacancy announcement what's required, but it's buried in a lot of narrative. You've got to read those vacancy announcements carefully to make sure that you don't miss anything. But it's up to you to get it right. If you miss it, you're not going to get referred for the job. They're going to tell you that you're ineligible because you did not include the right documentation. And as sad as it is, and I'm embarrassed to admit it, it has even happened to me. Racing through, I wait too long to apply. I'm going to hurry up and do it real fast. Think I got all the documents. I press the button, close it up for the day, find out, darn, I missed a document. That's it. It's over for that particular job. They do. You upload them. The documents that you upload to USA Jobs remain out there for, I believe it's 36 months. So periodically you want to go and double check, make sure that everything's still there. And you'll want to check anyway. You want to make sure that you have the most current versions of your documents out there. For example, federal employees, like I said, they'll be asked for an SF-50, but we get SF-50s regularly. Every year if we get a pay increase, the SF-50 gets updated. If you change jobs, there are lots of reasons why you might get an updated SF-50. And then when you do, you'll want to upload the current version. So you'll just want to keep an eye on your documents, make sure that they're current, but they're still out there. They'll be out there for about 36 months for you. And I think most of us are accustomed to using computers to do lots of things these days. It's very typical to apply for jobs online these days. USA Jobs and the application manager work very similarly to other online application processes. So you're going to see things that you recognize. You're not going to be expected to just know what you're supposed to do. You'll get prompted for information. You'll be asked for certain types of documents. So if you just follow the prompts, you'll know exactly what you need to do. When you've completed everything, you've built your accounts, you've uploaded documents, you've answered the assessment questionnaire, you're going to be given the opportunity to submit your answers. This is the time to double check, make sure you've got everything, compare the vacancy announcement with the documents that you've uploaded to make sure you got all the right documents. You click the button and it's done. After you've applied for the job, you can always go back to USA Jobs to check your application status. It'll tell you, just as you noted, sir, it'll tell you what the status is, whether or not you've been referred, whether or not your application is being reviewed for qualifications. You should get some sort of notification about your status. But if it goes stale, if you don't hear anything, 30, 60, 90 days, it's appropriate to call. Actually, I'd call after a month. If I hadn't heard anything, I'd call the point of contact that's listed on the vacancy announcement and just ask what the status is. And this is their job. I mean, you're not putting them out. It is not an imposition. They are hired to do this kind of work. So call them and ask them for the status. It's completely appropriate to do that. Something that you should know is the person that you're calling, though, is not the person that's going to be making the selection. So, we're really segmented in the government. We have a human resources office, and they handle the classifications and the staffing, and they work closely with hiring managers. But the person that you're speaking to on the phone is not the person that's going to decide who's getting the job, and they're not the person that can answer any real in-depth questions about the vacancy itself. So just keep that in mind when you call. Don't get too frustrated that they can't answer too many questions. They ought to be able to tell you the basic things like, the job closed, we have a referral list, you've been referred, we're reviewing qualifications. They ought to be able to tell you that sort of thing, but they can't tell you a whole lot about the actual job itself. Okay? So once you apply for the job, you'll be taken to a details page, and it'll tell you everything that you have out there. It'll list the status of the various documents, the resume, any miscellaneous documents that you've included, your qualifications letter, your qualifications assessment, should I say. It'll tell you that it's being processed, so you kind of know some things are happening. Also, when you apply for a job through USA Jobs, you should automatically receive an acknowledgement letter stating that we've received your application, we're reviewing, whatever. You should receive that. Don't panic if you don't, but you should receive one, and if you do receive it, it should be visible through this page. Okay. So the bottom line is that when you want to apply for a job through USA Jobs, you want to review the job announcement very carefully. It's going to tell you everything you need to know about applying for that job. It's easy to miss the details because there's a lot of language on that vacancy announcement. You want to read it all. You want to read it carefully. Make sure that you pay attention to the instructions for how to apply, because it changes from application to application. Sometimes you can apply using an uploaded resume. Sometimes you have to use a resume from the resume builder. It'll tell you all of that information. You want to make sure that you complete the assessment questionnaire that's in the application manager, and you want to answer the questions honestly. Don't inflate your experience, but don't lowball yourself. If you're on the fence, choose the higher. And then afterwards, after you apply, you press the button, submit your answers. You want to check your status within USA Jobs. You can make changes before the job announcement closes, like if you decide you found an error in your resume after checking it a million times. You can go and revise your resume before the job announcement closes. Once the job announcement closes, it's a done deal. There's really nothing else you can do about it. Okay? That's a really good question. I have a tough time answering this because we talked about how your resume should include the last 10 years of work experience. For a lot of people that have already been in the military, that was 15, 20 years ago. They've moved on to a civilian career, but they continue to be and should be very proud of their military experience. So they want to include it in their resume. But it's kind of a problem because it's really old. It's really old work experience. The experience may not be relevant to the job that they're seeking. One of the greatest risks of including old information in your resume is that you accidentally date yourself. You accidentally send messages about yourself that you're not trying to send. So age discrimination is illegal, and I'm not suggesting that anybody does it. Not in the federal government or in the private industry. But what I can tell you is that there's no such thing as neutral information. Anything that you include in your resume sends some sort of message, okay? The dates that you use, any affiliations that you identify in your resume, they tell the reader some things about you. So when you think about including really old work experience, even if it's military experience, you have to ask, what might I accidentally be telling? Am I accidentally saying that I'm only 6 years from retirement, so don't invest in me? Am I accidentally saying that I'm getting long in the tooth and I might be a little bit recalcitrant, not so flexible anymore? What sort of messages am I accidentally saying? On the one hand, military experience is highly respected and valuable. On the other hand, if it happened a long time ago, you could accidentally be dating yourself by including it. So, yes, one quick second. So I just ask you to make a judgment call. Ultimately, it's your resume. You own it. You decide what goes in it. There's no such thing as a perfect resume. But you ought to know that there are some things, some messages that you send by including certain information about yourself. And it's not just military experience. It's if you graduated from high school in 1972. You don't want to put that. If you graduated from college in 1972, you don't want to include the degree and where you went, but leave the year off. Unless it's required information, don't include it. Same thing with your military experience. What I recommend sometimes, I'll get to you. What I recommend sometimes is, you know, there's, for a lot of service members, there's an emotional connection with the work that they've done in the military. So it's hard to just lop it off and cut it from the resume. One of the things that I recommend is that they include references to the experience that they have, either in a qualification summary that might come at the beginning of the resume. So if you were in a leadership position in the military, and you don't want to list what you did back in 1984 because it was too long ago, you can include some information in the qualification summary, just a really short statement up at the beginning of your resume where you give yourself credit for that experience without dating it. The other thing that you could do is identify the experience like you would as a normal job, but omit the dates. It throws up a red flag when you start omitting dates for your work experience. It does. You might want to be prepared to explain it, but if you just can't cut it out because of the connection that you feel with it, leave it in, but understand what it might be doing to your resume. Yes, it's your supporting documentation that actually gets you the credit that you've earned, as opposed to your resume. Anything else? Yes, ma'am. Okay, so there are a couple different approaches to this. The format that we typically see for resumes is reverse chronological, and that means that we start with the most recent experience first and then we work our way back. But it's not the only format that you can use. A lot of former military members and people who have a lot of experience that dates way back will opt for a different format. They'll choose a functional format. And what that means is that rather than identifying what you've done based on years, you identify based on function. So you could have a function called leadership. And then under that headline called leadership, you would describe all the things that you've done that support leadership. You might have a function called financial management. And under financial management or banking or whatever it is, you would describe all the things that you've done that demonstrate your experience in banking. So by using the functional format, you de-emphasize dates. Be careful about using the functional format though, okay? To a hiring manager, that looks suspicious, right? Sometimes people that have been in prison will use the functional format because using this format, they also are able to hide gaps in employment, not just in prison. I mean, if you've been in and out of the workforce for whatever reasons that you have, you might choose a functional format. And sometimes then that raises a red flag. Well, what are they trying to hide? What are they not telling me by using this format? Again, it's a judgment call. You have to decide what risks you're willing to take, but that's a different approach. If you use a functional approach, then you de-emphasize dates, and it allows you to share more about your work experience without dating yourself. Yes, absolutely. Especially if you are just finishing up school. The expectation is that prior to school you were probably doing jobs that you had to do or needed to do in order to exist. But the expectation is that you might not have enough of the right work experience. So within the federal government, what might happen is that you might get hired in at a lower grade. Let's say a lot of positions are announced on what we call a career ladder. So they're announced at multiple levels, a GS 7, 9, and 11. So you come in at the GS 7 level, meaning you have the least amount of work experience, but you might have the right degree, the right education. And then each year, assuming you're performing to standard, you get an automatic, not automatic, assuming you're performing to standard, you get a grade increase. So the first year you operate at the GS 7 level, and that also means that you require more supervision, less autonomy, but then you progress to the GS 9 level the next year, and then assuming you're performing to standard, you progress to the GS 11 level the next year. So it is not uncommon to enter into a job within the federal market where you have little experience, especially if you've got the degree to support it. No. So the federal government is not as flexible in private industry. So in private industry, you meet a hiring manager, he likes you, you've got all the right stuff, you're awesome, it's just you might not have enough of the right work experience. The hiring manager has the authority to negotiate salary with you. Maybe he'll hire you paying you a little less, but then over time with the plan that she'll pay you more once you develop the experience. Well, it's predetermined in the federal government what the grade of a position will be. And there's a process behind it that I am not an expert on, but we have what we call classifiers within the federal government that classify and grade positions based on the level of responsibility, the level of authority, autonomy, those sort of, it's complicated, but positions are graded before they're ever placed out on the street to offer them up to people to apply for. So if it's announced at a GS9 level, it's already been determined what type of experience, how much experience you must have, what type of experience, how much education you must have. Generally speaking, if you're coming in at the GS9 level, it's expected that you have probably a year of experience and definitely a degree that supports it. We could talk about how fair that is. I mean, that's another discussion. I looked at a job announcement not too long ago, and it was talking about hiring somebody in at the GS11 level if they had a PhD. And I thought, what? An 11 for a PhD? It's insane. Sometimes the education requirements are pretty high, depending on what the grade is, but it's determined in advance. It's not something that could be negotiated with you once you interview for the job, for example. No. The question was, should there be an objective statement on the resume? No, 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 no. Objective statements are outdated. So, isn't it good we talked though? The objective statement focuses on what you, the job seeker, wants. What I want to get out of this relationship. Well, if you're really looking for a job and you're serious about getting one, the focus needs to be what you can offer, what can you give to the organization. So you don't want the objective statement because it sends the wrong message. It's an outdated convention. If you feel like you need to say something up front at the beginning of your resume, again, I recommend using something like a qualification summary, where you describe all the fantastic, awesome things that you offer. Why you would be the best candidate for the job, but not an objective statement. If you think about your resume like real estate, the first page, I mean, everything is about location then, right? The first page is the most important page of your resume. The first paragraph, the first half of the page is the most important part of the page on your resume. So you don't want to waste that space with anything that's not most important or most relevant about you. If you have little job experience, the most important thing you have that you can sell is your education. So you want to place that up front. That's the first section. But if you're someone that's been working for the last 10 years and you just came back to school to freshen up or to sort of change directions, but you've got a lot of work experience, your education isn't the top seller. It's your experience. So the first section on your resume would then be your work experience, followed by education. So it depends. It depends on where you are on your path. If you have lots of work experience, that's your top seller. You'll want to put that ahead of your education. The only exception that I have that I normally recommend is, if you went somewhere like Harvard or Yale, and that matters, you'll want to put that up front. But just remember, your resume is like real estate and location matters. The most important things that you want people to pay attention to, you want to get those early in your resume. Because I've seen both. Context matters. One of the things that I see with federal resumes is that people will just list a whole bunch of systems at the end of their resume. And so the first question I ask is, okay, well, did you just have a password or did you program? It matters what you did in those systems. So context does matter. If you can find a way to list succinctly without overwhelming the reader with too much technical language, it's appropriate to include a little bit of context so the reader understands what you've actually done with those systems. There's a difference between logging on and programming, right? Yes, so it does matter. Unfortunately, the answer varies. There's a push within the federal sector to speed up the hiring process because it can take, in the past, easily take more than 6 months to bring someone in from off the street. So there's a huge push to shorten that time. How it's supposed to work, and it often does not, but how it's supposed to work is you push the submit button, and then within 30 days you ought to have something telling you you've been referred or not referred, or you've been referred and your qualifications are still being assessed. You should get some notification within about a month, at the latest. Usually earlier than that, because at the point that the job announcement closes, some person then begin, at least for DFAS, let me clarify, because different agencies have different processes, but for DFAS, at the point that the job announcement closes, then a group of classification specialists actually start looking at the resumes to determine who ought to be referred and who should not. But before the human being looks at the resume, there is an initial assessment that happens. So one of the things we're going to talk about is when you apply for a job, you also are asked to complete an assessment questionnaire. And that questionnaire is going to ask you questions to help determine your eligibility or your initial qualifications for the job. So, for example, if it's a federal position and up front they've stated that you must have, that this job is only open to other federal employees and you are not a federal employee, you're going to be asked a question. Do you have 52 weeks of service at the next lower grade level? So if the job is being announced as a GS9, you'll be asked if you have 52 weeks of service at the GS7 level. And if you answer no to that, that's a disqualifier. You're automatically kicked out. No human being is going to review your resume. But assuming you answer enough of those assessment questions correctly and you make that initial jump over that initial hurdle, a human being is then going to review your resume and start making some decisions about whether or not you should be passed on to the next referral point. So within 30 days you ought to hear something. Often that does not happen.
Real quick, not to interrupt you, let's all thank Sheila, please, for her time and expertise. In addition, thank you to our other DFAS team members who are here and have helped to coordinate all of our events and our partnership. Thank you guys for coming and participating. I'm going to stick around. I hope Sheila, hope some of you will too, because I think USA Jobs is very involved, and we've skimmed a good surface of it. And if you guys, before you leave, if you can make sure you fill out your evaluation, that would be helpful for us as well. And just thank you very much for your presentation today. And she will be sticking around to go through USA Jobs. So thank you again.
All right.